Hey there, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome into the Kumo Theater. If you are within the sound of my voice, you're welcome to join us and come on down here. We've got our next speaker taking the stage. So my small but mighty group, I'm going to need you to give him a big rock star welcome. Can we do that? All right. Welcome to the stage, Alex Schoof.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Schoof. I'm the Director of Product over at Fugue. And today I want to talk a little bit less about Fugue and more just in general about moving fast on AWS and getting it right. So it's never been faster or easier to deploy lots of really complicated infrastructure on top of AWS. And if you follow any of the announcements that happen all the time, AWS has been delivering a lot of innovation, and there's a lot of innovation coming out of the ecosystem that make it very easy to quickly and inexpensively deploy a lot of infrastructure live very, very quickly. But what about security, governance, and compliance? These tend to be a little bit of dirty words, but when I talk about governance and compliance, these could be either external compliance requirements, something like PCI or NIST 853, but they could also just be internal compliance requirements or governance requirements. You might just want to know, what do you have running? What is that 3-year-old EC2 instance that's still taking traffic? So this is an issue for a couple of reasons. One of them is over the years, as AWS has grown, there's been sort of organic sprawl through things like shadow IT and autonomous organizations inside of large companies that have just been building more and more stuff, and it's difficult to get your arms around it and know what your exposure is. It's also really challenging because we want our service teams to move very quickly and to deliver value to customers quickly and to innovate really rapidly, but we don't want to do that at a pace that puts the business at risk. So we end up in a situation where all of our engineering teams have great new tools to move fast and innovate really quickly, and security is trying to catch up. So we want our teams to move as quickly as possible, but we want them to do it safely. And that sounds big and difficult and loaded, so what does that really mean? What it really means is we want to know what invariants need to hold true about our environment. What rules should never be violated, what things should always be true in our production environments. And we need to know at any given time what's running where, how is it configured, and how those resources implement the policy requirements that we've set out. And we need to make sure that as we deliver innovation, as we deploy new versions, changes to environments don't violate those policy constraints. And so how do you actually do this? Well, there's actually a couple steps, and the first one is that you need to know what you have running. You probably have some existing infrastructure, and you need to get your arms around that and understand what your current exposure is. Once you do that, you need to be able to deploy new workloads or changes to existing workloads through source-controlled automation. And you need to make sure that that source-controlled deployment mechanism is the only way that you're pushing changes to the environment. And then you make policy adherence be a condition of those deployments. So we're going to walk through each one of these. So you need to know what you already have. This is really step 0. Not all of us get to do greenfield deployments. Everybody has some running infrastructure. And this is one of the places where running in the cloud is actually a huge advantage over running in a traditional data center because you have describe APIs that let you inspect what's actually running. And folks like AWS or people in the ecosystem like Evident.io can build tooling around those APIs to tell you what you have running and to talk about where you may be falling out of compliance with policy. And this is a screenshot of a tool that we built at Fugue called the Composer that you can point at an existing environment and it'll actually generate a diagram, a visualization of what you have running, and you can drill into each resource and really understand what's running. So once you have your arms wrapped around what's actually out there, you need to start thinking about how you deploy new workloads and how you update those workloads. And the current best practice is to implement infrastructure as code, where you have a trusted system that takes source code as a representation of infrastructure and automatically deploys it out into the cloud. And so this is usually a combination of a deployment system, some kind of source control like GitHub, and a CI/CD system like Jenkins. And what you're really aiming for is to have a single source of truth in a source-controlled repo that has versioning and an audit log that represents what's actually running in the real world. So an example of this would be using AWS native platform features, something like code commit plus pipelines and code deploy with CloudFormation. but you might also do something like use GitHub and Jenkins to manage building changes to Fugue compositions and then use Fugue to actually push it out. Once you have this automated deployment system, you need to make sure that that's the only way that changes actually go out into the environment. It doesn't do you any good if you've built a really robust automated deployment system, then somebody can log into the AWS console and start opening up security group rules. You really want to have that source-controlled composition be the source of trust for all of your stuff. So if you want to roll this yourself, you can use AWS services like Config, CloudWatch Events, CloudTrail. Those give you really useful hooks. But if you want to be more proactive about it, you can use a system like Fugue that will proactively remediate change. So even if somebody goes in and makes a manual change, Fugue will go and correct that for you. And then finally, you need to make policy adherence be a condition of deployment. So if you have a system where the only way to push change out into the environment is going through a trusted system that follows all of your normal source control conventions and all of your normal code review conventions, if you gate that final deployment on programmatic policy adherence, then you never get into a bad state. And the sort of penultimate version of this is policy as code, but you might be doing something else, like you might have a manual approval step, or you might have to have it go through a CM board. Policy as code is where you actually express your compliance policy as executable code. So this is checked into source control, people can do code reviews on it, you can test it, and you can really push policy checking to developers. So instead of building out a whole application, going to deploy it, finding out you did something wrong, and then spending 6 months to remediate it, you can find out at development time that what you're doing is going to fall outside of policy. And we call this building highways instead of toll booths. You actually enable your engineers to move faster by making it easy for them to work with policy in an executable way. So, how do you move fast safely? The first step is to really understand what you already have. You can't start building automation if you don't know what's already there. And you need to have a way of deploying new workloads and changes to existing workloads through source-controlled automation. You need to have a representation of your infrastructure as source code that gets automatically pushed out to production. And you need to make sure that that's the only way that changes happen to your environment. And if you do that, you can gate deployments on policy changes. And what that gives you at the end of the day is that you always know what invariants hold true about your environment. At any given time, you know what's running where and how it's configured, and you know that changes to your environment aren't going to violate policy because by definition they can't. So if you're interested in any of this, come over to booth 1600. We have really excellent t-shirts and stickers, and we're giving away a lot of cool stuff, and we'd love to talk to you about how we can make this easy. Thanks.